As most of you know, over 1,000 rockets were fired into Israel by the Lebanon terrorist group Hezbollah while I was there. Now I'm going to get you fired. Yet there was no fear from me or any of the Israelis I countered the entire time of my 10 days in Israel. Along my trip, many moments struck me. My Birthright group was the only group and was lucky enough to have 6 soldiers with us at all times, sharing rooms with us, eating with us, and becoming very close with us. At one point during our trip, we had a moment where we all visited Mount Herzl, a cemetery where thousands of soldiers are buried and where some of the most well-known influences to Israel are buried. At the same time, we were discussing a wall filled with names of people killed in terrorist attacks, a wall that still sadly has open spaces for more names to be added, but we hope and pray that we never have to do so. One of those names on that wall was one of my soldiers' cousins. One of my soldiers was an American and joined the Israeli Defense Force because his cousin, who always believed in him, was killed in a terrorist attack in Israel. Besides telling us this, he told us he felt so safe in his country and that would never leave Israel and would never move back to America. But the moment that struck out most to me on this trip was when our tour guide asked us how many of us felt safer in Israel than we did at home, even though we were all in a war zone at that time, having rockets shot in our direction. All 40 hands from my group shot up. I was amazed. I knew I felt this way, but I didn't know everyone else did. The Israelis were then asked whether they would ever move to America, and the response was no. It is unsafe in America. There are too many guns. I was shocked, and I didn't know people felt this way about my country. I have always told people I felt safer in Israel than America, but at this time, I felt safe. I looked around everywhere. I went and saw soldiers with massive guns protecting me, which made me a little bit scared at first. But I wasn't scared of these guns or these people holding these guns. I didn't need to constantly watch my surroundings like I do at school, the mall, my apartment, or even at my synagogue, fearing what could happen around me at any moment. But I learned on this trip that these mass shootings do not occur in Israel. As my armed soldier told me, only warriors have guns. You can only own a firearm in Israel if you were or are a combat soldier. Israel doesn't have guns, alligators, or snakes, or anything that we in Florida or Americans are afraid of. Israel only has bombs, but Israel also has a fantastic military protecting and serving their country, so those bombs ever barely hit people. My Israelis are very happy living in Israel besides all the problems going on. Some of them told me that they are mad at the government, but are still going to love and fight for their country because it's theirs. They cannot be angry at their government because it's been the same forever. As they told me, Israelis don't stop loving their country because who's in charge, which would speak a lot to Americans. Israelis don't get mad and give up. They know how lucky they are to have their country and still respect one another based on political differences. Our soldiers told us if it was another world and they had a choice not to go into the army right at the age of 18 like they have to, they would still join because they're so proud of their military and country no matter what. I learned that only one of our soldiers had attended these protests, but she still loves and chooses to fight for her army no matter how angry she is. There was no fear from any Israelis, soldiers, or around us. We went to a shuk, which is a bumped up version of a farmer's market on Shabbat, where hundreds of Jews and Israelis were buying food for their families for Shabbat dinner with no fear except trying to push their way through way too many Israelis and other Jews, having no worry in the world, and you wouldn't even know that there were rockets being shot in our way. I've always known I was Jewish, as I'm the daughter of 2 rabbis, and at my second birthday party in the Oneg room, my bat mitzvah and my bat mitzvah party in this room, I have called the synagogue my second home for 21 years. Still, I never knew I could be or feel more Jewish than I already have. Going to Israel without my parents, I didn't think any of this would change. Of all this was up until the Yad Vashem Museum. Yad Vashem is a Holocaust museum in Israel. Walking through Yad Vashem with my Birthright group, almost everybody cried in the first minutes we walked in. I knew and I understood that I learned about the Holocaust more than my peers did due to my parents. So I went up, hugged, rubbed their backs, and comforted my peers, knowing I had just met them days before. But we felt the same pain connected to these people. But I wasn't crying yet, and I couldn't understand why. I knew I'd been there before. I already knew a lot more about the Holocaust than any other kids my age do, but I still couldn't understand why I wasn't crying. And it was then that I realized it was because I was so angry that this has happened to my people. I was so mad the Holocaust happened and that people still to this day believed it didn't. And people still to this day hate my people. I was so angry until I got to the worst and most graphic part of the museum, the part where they show you the videos and pictures from the day where the camps were liberated. My tour guide told me that they took these photos and videos because they knew one day people would deny that this ever happened, which put goosebumps and chills all over my body. Once we got to this part of the museum, I started to cry uncontrollably. I lost it to the point where my fellow Birthright members came up and hugged me just like I did to them moments before, asking if I was okay, and my response was no, I wasn't. I cannot stop crying at this moment. I realized the images of the people who I've seen before in this museum hit me differently. I was alone in Israel without my family at this museum. I was lucky enough to be in a Jewish state where more than 6 million Jews did not get to go. Seeing what I saw, these people struggled and died. Seeing these pictures hurt me in ways I couldn't describe. I started thinking about our own Holocaust survivor, and while I was there, I read a letter from a daughter saying goodbye to her parents, promising that she would see them again, and she never got to. My tour guide then told me a story of a girl trying to add her father's name to the list of people who were killed in the Holocaust, and the museum telling her that his name was already in the museum, her finding out that she had a brother that she didn't know was still alive after the Holocaust years ago, finding this out. I still could not stop crying. I put myself in these people's shoes, and then I realized while crying, I was so hurt and sad that I started to cry even more. I realized that besides being a rabbi's daughter, I could fall in love with my religion even more than I already have, but in my own way, which I never thought was even possible. I was so proud and lucky to be Jewish and lucky to be outwardly Jewish in ways that people never got the chance to be. After this trip of 10 days and many more experiences later, I have enough time to talk up here that I believe I still feel safer in Israel. And as my soldiers told us, Israel will always be my home, even if I look like a crazy American wearing Crocs.